Fancy items are super strong in the Bazaar. They are the sort of final form of an item. But are they simply balanced because of their rarity alone, and will being so close to greatness, yet so far away, dampen the experience? Now obviously there is power in fancy items. You have to work so hard to get them, and they are so fluid and flexible, you can do so many things with them, and just the raw power they get from the shinies before them. Fancy items are obviously strong. But are they too strong? And well, never mind, we are getting ahead of ourselves. What are fancy items? Some of you here might not have any idea what they are. So, for those of you, let me explain. And for anyone else, there should be a timestamp down below to skip ahead to the next section. Fancy items are an upgraded item. So let's say that you have an item. You have a yo-yo, and you can buy a second yo-yo. That will upgrade your yo-yo into a shiny. You won't have two, but buying that upgrades your original one. You now have a basically level 2 yo-yo. Well, if you then buy a third one, you end up upgrading that into a fancy item, your level 3 yo-yo, if you will. And each time it upgrades, it gets stronger. This is of course similar to the way that other auto battlers work. They tend to have a level or star system, but in those you typically have to get 3 of the same character to upgrade them by 1 level. The Bazaar cuts out loads of that nonsense. We don't have a reroll, so you're not going to be able to find 3 of a thing super easily to upgrade it into level 2. And then you had to find 3 level 2s to upgrade to a level 3. No. Other auto battlers, I'm afraid you're doing it wrong. This is the way to do it. This reduces a load of the stress about trying to find that last single level 1 unit, because you've put so much of your economy into this massive level 3 that you're never going to get. No. That doesn't happen in the Bazaar. You either find it or you don't. There's 1 item to upgrade to shiny, 1 item to upgrade to fancy. And that's what a fancy item is. Or is it? Well, shinies and fancies specifically have a twist. Let's say you are playing a gig. You're a sort of up-and-coming band in the local area, but your sound equipment sucks. You have cheap $10 or £10 amps. Basically, no one is going to be able to hear you. You know, those little tiny box things, you must have seen them. I had one as a kid. So, a shiny item upgrade would be going to the music store and buying a big, bulky amp so that everyone can hear you clearly and precisely during your gig. And it'll be a much more enjoyable experience. It'll have more impact. Well, if that's shiny, then fancy isn't just buying the £2,000 amplifier. Oh no. Shiny item is buying your slightly better amplifier. Fancy item is, while having that amplifier, also buying some fireworks or some pyrotechnics or backing dancers. They are diverting. They are adding to the show. They are pivoting. They are allowing you to do extra different things to make the show in general better and have a wider reach. Fancy items don't necessarily increase the power of an item, but they do increase the appeal of it. Fortunately, in the latest AMA, the designers gave us a lot of insights into fancy items. Greg, the game designer, gave me a thumbnail for the video, first of all, giving us the exact numbers, at least for now. You currently have about a 36% chance to get fancy of any one particular item in your build, just from merchant shops, providing that you go to an average number of shops each day. Special events can dramatically increase this. Many other factors also influence it, and on any given run you might end up with anywhere from only a couple of shinies to having more than 5 fancies. Now, 36% for a chance to get a fancy might seem pretty low. However, other auto battlers, like I said, do have that reroll function. They make it a lot easier to get those 3 stars. So 36%, it sounds about right, honestly, without a reroll. But that is specifically only going to merchants like JJ who offer every item, so you have very slim chances, and also not going to any other particular events or influencing it in any way. The Bazaar is all about the choices you make. They are your choices. The randomness comes before the choice. You get to decide what happens. So, if you are going for a particular shiny or fancy item, you can go to particular merchants. You can focus on particular events to make sure that happens. There are even specific encounters that are almost built to enable fancy finding, like the once magic mirror merchant. I chased Stephen on one of his answers about fancy item searching and got some solid information about this event. It used to show you an exact duplicate of your items, allowing you to buy more of them, but being able to buy fancies and shinies was too good, along with a plethora of other issues, so now it is a different merchant. They will now show you 3 base versions of items that you own, so at the very least, you can get a shiny from this merchant guaranteed every time you go to them. But you cannot duplicate any crazy buffed items, and you might be unfortunate and just not get shown that one item you were looking for, but the chances are pretty high. As I said, this isn't a regular auto battler. You have no reroll, that's not the point. You have to play smart. The choice is, as I said, yours. Other auto battlers are basically just a race to the meta. Can you get the best build in any given patch? The Bazaar is going to be much less of that, because you aren't going to be able to force a specific build. You are going to have to play with the cards you are given. And I genuinely thought this would get harder for the Bazaar team to make a thing the more they added into the game. The more resources they added, the more choices they added. I thought there was going to be a way at some point for us to force metas. And it looks even less likely than it did back then. Speaking of adding stuff, you can actually continue to do that. Pickle asked if you already have a fancy item, will that item be removed from the pool, or will you encounter a 4th copy? And Greg confirmed that currently it does not disappear from the pool. So you can get a second one coming, but it does take some luck. We have talked about preventing it, but the combining feature is only a month old, and it is too soon to make a final decision. So you can still get multiples of an item. Our old builds that we were working on for a while may still work. And we've actually now seen this in the game. When we got the Dually preview last Friday, we saw 2 items, 1 fancy and 1 base, next to the Dually core mechanic. If you want more information on the Dually core mechanic, there will be a video on that later this week, so stay tuned. And as much as I loved my old builds, that was just a joke, I jest. But saying that, I definitely do advocate for those very, very rare, let me stress this, very rare opportunities for you to get a broken funny build. If I can get 2 fancy items that when put together, like 2 fancy of the same items that together do something crazy, if I get that once in my entire time playing the Bazaar, that is a good thing. That's the kind of shit that will blow up on Reddit and will be great fun to watch and engage with, even as a third party, someone else's build. If you get 2 fancy items, 2 identical fancy items in your build, and it does something ridiculous, share it with us on our Discord. I'd love to see it. But that does raise an important point, actually. Fancy items are better. Fancy items are perhaps broken better. But are they too strong? Are they so strong in fact that builds that use them are too weak, and you are forced into going for shiny and fancy items? A question again answered by Greg. In short, he says yes. While at lower ranks you can win with no shiny or fancy items, to achieve even gold rank or higher, you will most likely need to include shiny and fancy items. But as you aren't expected to win every run, he does go on to say that anyone can define what a successful run is to them. Assumedly saying you can kind of make your own fun, you can decide what your goal is. This does make sense though, this is a core mechanic to the game now. It's like deciding to play baseball and thinking, you were too cool to use a bat, I'm just going to use your hand or your fist. That's not how the game is played. Avoiding shiny and fancy items is now not how the game is played, and I think it's going to be better for it. The Bazaar at its core has always kept that one rule alive though. Through Reynad, even when Ben was here, and now through the new team, all of these minds together have still kept this one rule alive. There must be player agency where there is randomness. The RNG must happen before the player decision. Sure, you are looking for a fancy item, but it's not like you load into a day and you are immediately shown some cards. That is randomness after the player action. You've had your day, you've been shown some cards to pick, that's it. The randomness happens before the player choice. You get shown some merchants and from those you pick. You pick from a selection of different things. Let me rephrase this. In a traditional auto battler, if you want to specifically target certain items, let's just call them items, you would press the reroll button to find them. The player makes an action, reroll, and then the thing happens, items. In this case, the randomness, you are shown your merchants happen, then the player takes an action, picks a merchant, and then there's a little bit more randomness, but it's much more confined. The main randomness happens before the player choice. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this does apply to shiny and fancy items, and how they might not be overpowered, but to a smart player, they can certainly work for you. Because you can target specific events as and when you see them. A player who knows their events well may get the random plate put in front of them. They might see JJ, they might even see Nufu, and think, oh, hero skills, they're good. But they might also see someone like Andy, and realise that if they're after a specific shiny or fancy item, that might be their best choice. And this is something Stephen goes into quite some detail in answering a question from Ice Age. This is a great question, and the answer is pretty technical and nuanced. So, the way that items and events interact varies based on the item and event. We have one core merchant, JJ, who sells all the character items, and he shows up a lot. So, if you want shinies and fancies of the big pool of items, just keep going to him. Then we have less frequent merchants, that pools are restricted by item size. So if you're trying to get a fancy trained spider, then you'll go to Andy whenever he's available. And there are some events that let you search for those duplicates in more interesting ways. Deborah and Curio's Junkyard, for example. He then goes on to talk about how one-time events like Farai won't trigger repeatedly, so you can't get a shiny or fancy artificial heart. It's already as strong as it needs to be. This is all really good information though, and it kind of leans into what we were already thinking. The choice is yours. If you see Andy pop up, maybe it's a good opportunity to go to him. If you have a yo-yo on your field, a small item for Pygmalion, and you see Andy, maybe it's worth going to him just in case, from that limited pool of only Pygmalion small items, you are lucky enough to get that yo-yo. Equally, if you are trying to build up your luxury tents, say you are Reynad, as we've seen in so many of his games before, playing Pygmalion, playing a big tanky Pygmalion health build, you have a luxury tent, you have a space scraper even, right? Those are two large items that you would love to upgrade. So if ever Pol comes around, the big item merchant, you go to him. Even if you see Nufu, you go to Pol. Because the chances of you getting a luxury tent or space scraper from Pol are drastically higher than your chances of getting them from JJ. And that is where the RNG of merchants and the player choice involved is so much better than the ridiculous RNG involved in just spamming the reroll button. Fancy items are strong. They may well be the center and core of your build, but that's kind of the point of them. However, you might not get the exact one you want. The chances are low, 36% to be precise, at least at the moment. So you have to be smart. You have to be ready to pivot, you have to be ready to pick different events that might not necessarily be optimal for the rest of your run, but increase the chances of finding the right shiny or fancy item. So be prepared, be flexible in your moves, and may the best strategist win. Fancy items might be strong right now, but they are not the most recently announced thing that I am worried about being remotely broken. That title goes to the Fates. And for more information on those lovely ladies, check out this next video.